Second category is what I would call the removal of hostilities. And this relates also to U.S. DPRK Singapore Declaration. There's reference in that, as you know, to the development of a new U.S. DPRK relationship, one that contemplates a so-called peace and prosperity. That is not well defined at all in the Singapore Declaration. In the Inter-Korean Declaration, it has been given some definition, and talks are moving forward at that level. Third category is what I would call the peace regime, which contemplates, certainly in the Inter-Korean Declaration, several components. It is very ambitious. It contemplates expressly in that declaration the end of the state of war, even as early as this year. And it looks to the negotiation of a peace treaty, which would replace the armistice, which, as you know, is a temporary, a long, but presumably temporary circumstance. The U.S.-Singapore Declaration also contemplates a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. It uses that terminology. But again, the detail contained in that declaration is not as specific as it is in the Inter-Korean Panmunjom Declaration. And then the fourth commitment relates to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The actual language of the declaration is that the DPRK commits to work toward complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The lawyer in me reads that public statement as shy of a commitment to actual denuclearization. It's an agreement to work toward. But the administration has said repeatedly that this is a commitment to denuclearize. And the Panmunjom Declaration makes reference to the common goal of a nuclear-free Korean Peninsula. Now, where do we stand today with respect to the implementation and the forward movement with regards to these summit agreements and declarations? We are, I think it's fair to say, in a period of challenging diplomacy. Implementation is being sought, but is difficult to achieve. It has become apparent that there is, on both sides, frustration. And you may have seen in the news yesterday the prospective meeting that was to be held between the senior North Korean negotiator and Secretary Pompeo was canceled, presumably to be rescheduled, but canceled nonetheless. The frustration, I think, if one is to condense it, has to do with several components. I think one central difference that is impeding implementation has to do with the sequencing of further steps on both sides. With the U.S. basically saying there must be concrete, tangible, specific steps by North Korea before we will make concessions. The North Koreans, on the other hand, are saying we have taken specific action. We have destroyed missile site, we have destroyed testing site, we have returned remains of POW, and it is incumbent on the United States to reply with a lessening of economic sanctions and other measures, including, for example, a willingness to declare the end of the war. And there is, wrapped up in that, I think, a different timetable on both sides, with the U.S. saying that there will not be a removal of economic sanctions until there is denuclearization, and the North saying we cannot denuclearize until we can trust. And so the evidence, the public evidence anyway, that shows a bridging of that gap is not apparent. And the cancellation of several meetings would indicate that it's more than just a perception, but that it is, in fact, real. Now, before I stop, I may be running too long here. I want to quickly cover two things. One of them are a few reflections on what I regard as the big questions that influence what kind of action might be taken. And then I want to reflect on what I see as several operational options for going forward that relate to how this impasse might or might not be broken. That is, the impasse as to implementation. The first big question that I think parties face is there a military option? Do we find leverage beyond simply economics? Or are we in a position to threaten the elimination of North Korean leadership as a lever to produce diplomacy that will succeed? The U.S. has not taken the military option off the table, but I think it is fair to say that the view is it is a very challenging option. Not only because it might in some circumstances require us to launch a first strike in response to certain North Korean behavior, but because it also may not succeed in military terms. I'm not a military person. My sense, having talked with many, having read, having been part of many discussions involving U.S. military personnel, is that it would be a challenging military operation to remove North Korea's nuclear capability with a U.S. strike. It also doesn't answer the question of, even should it succeed in removing certain individuals, what are we left with who replaces them? Will those that replace them be any better than those that went before? And so the utility of the military option, though we don't officially take it off the table, is, I think, the challenge of proposition. So where then do we go for leverage? We go perhaps to economic pressure, and we go perhaps to negotiation. The second question that I regard as a fundamental question that shapes how one fashions a strategy has to do with whether Kim Jong-un is in fact willing to give up his nukes. Or are we simply going around again the same cycle we've been through before, with some commitments and then a backsliding, an escalation of tension. The tension gets broken then by a new round of negotiation. But in the meantime, progress on development of nuclear capability moves forward. We don't know whether this time is different. Some say it is. Some say that Kim Jong-un is a different kind of leader that he has seen in his younger days, the West, and that he knows that his long-term survival depends on economic development of North Korea. That it's not just nukes, but that he may be willing to trade nukes for economic development under certain circumstances. That proposition can be debated. Maybe in the Q&A we can talk about that. But that is the second big question in my mind. The third big question is there simply too much distrust to contemplate a negotiated outcome? Or are we separated by very different systems with very little basis for reliance on agreement? Those are the big questions that I think shape in many ways how one feels about this circumstance. Now, I may be running too far with my time here. How much time do I have?
If you need another
Couple minutes. We may come back to some of this in the Q&A. Let me stop here if I could. I'm not feeling too well. Let me pull my thoughts together if I think I need some more.
Okay. Should we finish it off there and then?
Let me come.
Okay.
I'm going to come back in a minute, but John, why don't you go ahead? And my apologies. I'm okay.
Well, let me add my thanks to Olin for his insights and his scene setting on this very important and complex issue. We're grateful for not only what Olin has had to say this evening, but as was alluded to earlier, he has been instrumental and helpful to us in the planning of the trip for this coming spring of our Garfield scholars to South Korea. As you heard in the introduction of Olin, he is a man who has incredible contacts in countries like South Korea, in China, Japan, and elsewhere in the world, and we're grateful to him for sharing them with the Hiram community. One of the things, I sort of never have gotten over being a student, and you continue to try to learn, and one hopes one continues to learn through one's life after Hiram College. And one of the things that I have been really grateful to have been able to do is to watch some of the great pros in the business at their work, and being on a track 1.5 negotiation with Olin and watching him work with the Chinese, for example, has just been something that I've learned from and something I've benefited from. Well, I'm giving thanks. Let me just thank, as Olin did, the organizers of this, to James Thompson, to Kathy Lushback, to all of you for attending and spending a couple hours with us this evening. And we're all grateful, as was mentioned earlier, for the support of Bill Recker and Mark Logan. I think after that first group of thank yous, I think I saw Ted Helmuth come in. Thank you, Ted, and I think Michael Canty's back there, and thank you, Michael, for your support for these seminars. There's a lot on the public and Hiram plate at the moment, and so we appreciate all of your support and interest in that of President Forlata in bringing outside speakers to the campus on issues of vital national interest. And it's always refreshing and inspiring for those of us that come to campus to spend some time with our Garfield scholars and other students. Owen, I think, made reference to the lunch that we had today, talking a bit about some of the plans for the trip. And their interest, your interest, gives us a hope for the future. Now, Owen has done a great job of setting the scene and reminding us how complex the security environment is in Northeast Asia. Negotiating and implementing effective nuclear agreements amid such complexity is a vital but seemingly intractable task. It will be easy to get this wrong. It will be easy for the U.S. to fail if we and our allies do not plan carefully and do our homework. I would argue, though, that I think there is some cause for optimism, as there are best practices from prior agreements that provide instructive lessons for effective implementation and effective verification. Part of the complete and irreversible call for denuclearization of North Korea also says they're verifiable denuclearization of North Korea. What does that mean, and how do we reinforce non-proliferation norms? Well, the U.S. has years of relevant experience. We know how to bring countries to the negotiating table to address the issues that arise during implementation and to solve tough monitoring problems, including those with countries like North Korea that can be difficult adversaries and that are motivated by different interests and goals, and the questions that Owen outlined arise. What is their intent? Can we trust them? If we do trust them, how do we verify? So in the next few minutes, let me draw out a couple of those lessons from the past, from the perspective of a former intelligence officer and a current advisor on monitoring issues. Is Olin said, one of the things you get to do when you retire out of government is you still get to travel around and be part of these things called Track 1.5 diplomacy or Track 2 diplomacy, where you get former officials to talk to their counterparts in ways that sometimes it's difficult for current officials to do. And you always get some doodads as part of it. I'm wearing a shirt here that was put together by Max Mohan, the tailor in Singapore, who seems to cater to Track 2 negotiations. That was a different trip than Owen. But even more importantly, I brought the papers over this evening in this folder that was given us when we were in Beijing by the Chinese to carry our folders in. I think it's important that we stay close with the Chinese on these discussions, and so I want to make sure they hear every word. I've done some of this post-retirement work on monitoring and verification with a grant from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, so I should give them some credit for their funding of ways to improve verification. But even more importantly, and I'll come back to this at the end, to promote greater public awareness and involvement in issues like this. Nuclear agreements, not only with North Korea, but with Iran, with Russia, with China, with others, are really at a critical juncture. There was an article in The Economist earlier this year that characterized the state of play in such negotiations as nuclear disarmageddon. And I've been coming to Hiram now for over a decade to do seminars like this, and I remember it was just 5 years or so. The theme was, how do we work toward a world of zero nuclear weapons? What needs to be done in terms of preparation and verification, negotiation of that? And now we're talking about a world in which we're on the verge of accelerated nuclear arms races. A world in which the U.S. and Russia need to determine whether they're going to renew the new START agreement, which expires within a year, where the President Trump, has said that because of Russian noncompliance, that the U.S. is no longer going to be part of the treaty on the limitation, the reduction of intermediate range nuclear capable missiles, which have been the centerpiece of the Reagan and the George Herbert Walker Bush arms control agenda with Russia. That the United States has said that because of our concern about Iranian behavior, that we would no longer be part of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear agreement with Iran. How does all this come together? That effective agreements can in fact help foster strategic stability and be a hindrance to both horizontal proliferation, that is, nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction spreading to new states, and vertical proliferations. We're seeing in some ways, in both cases in North Korea, vertical proliferation where a state is improving the quality of its weapons, where we see North Korea and the nuclear testing that Owen mentioned, moving from simple atomic weapons to weapons that appear to have the qualities of boosting or thermal nuclear effects. So what are the factors that we can learn that are there in the past, that we can learn from prior agreements that might be relevant to the way ahead on North Korea, to the answering the questions that Olin posed? Successful agreements have been brought about by the successful integration of military and economic sticks and negotiating carrots, and informed by anticipatory comprehensive strategy. There is a tendency for those of us that live closer to the Washington Beltway to divide up into two camps. There's the camps that have never found an arms control agreement that they didn't like, and the camp that says those agreements never work and we need to find more sanctions or more military action to bring about the world in which we want. But in fact, the reality of success has been in between, that where you could bring together military deployments to deal with strategic consequences, as we've seen in trying to do with North Korea, and also hold out the prospect of negotiations. In doing so, and in implementing an agreement with North Korea, will require the solving of a very complex Rubik's Cube. Some of you are too young to remember what Rubik's Cubes are, but when you're trying to line out the colors right, you get frustrated because you do it on one side and it flips over to a different color on the other side. And that is in fact what we're facing on North Korea. One of the reasons why I thought it was so great that Owen could participate in this panel is because of the depth of his experience in economics, because the economic aspects of Northeast Asia are part of that Rubik's Cube. We have ongoing trade difficulties with the Chinese, for example, well known to folks here in Ohio. But how do we trade it off to get the Chinese support that we need in coming to some successful outcome with North Korea? Do we grant concessions on trade to bring them in, or do we don't bring them in and stay hard on trade? And it's just about one set of the interlocking issues. What are the primary interests of the countries who might participate in both the negotiations and implementation? How are those interests determined? As we might look at in a liberal arts college, what is the role of history, of culture, of threat perception, of strategic calculus, of domestic politics, of bureaucratic institutions, calculations of regime survival in the North, and personalities, both in the U.S. and in North Korea itself, in determining and carrying out negotiating positions and implementation steps. Sometimes in the past we have been successful in focusing those interests and bringing states to the table into successful implementation by what we've called dual track approaches. And I mentioned the INF Treaty before, and it's kind of in my mind at the moment because we're now in this great debate of whether the INF Treaty. But one of the reasons that intermediate range agreement was under such pressure was because of developments in Northeast Asia. And INF was successful because it grew out of trying to respond to Russian deployment of the SS-20, in which the U.S. then said we were going to deploy Pershing IIs and ground launch cruise missiles in Europe. But at the same time, we would be willing to engage in talks that were successful to eliminate those systems. The recent U.S. Nuclear Posture Review that recently published suggests the possibility of such a dual-track approach for Northeast Asia and for other regions of the world. But in pursuing that, we need to be concerned about the danger of unintended consequences. What could be the possible, not only good, but bad outcomes of the negotiation? How might an agreement with North Korea either strengthen or weaken the International Non-Proliferation Treaty or the interests of other states in the region? If we don't get this right, we could go into a world in which we have increased the incentives for Japan or South Korea to want to pursue nuclear weapons programs of their own if there is a concern that we have not dealt effectively with the threat from North Korea. Or if we open up, if one allows North Korea to maintain a nuclear weapons program in some form, does that increase the incentives of other states to want to do that? Another factor in prior successes, which is not certain at the moment, is that prior arms control successes have been largely grounded in bipartisan executive and congressional emphasis and working together across party lines. In the heyday of arms control between the U.S. and the then Soviet Union and later Russia, there were great lions in the Senate. Senator Sam Nunn, Senator Dick Lugar, of different parties that could work together and help forge consensus that would work as part of these agreements, and to be part of the negotiating team in some way.